5th of February 2024, this edition of Boerbeskuit, I'm going to talk about some news. We start off with this one that I see. Doctors are willing to work, but they are unemployed. Apparently a large number of doctors that completed their, as they call it, the Zuma years, are now unemployed. But the government cannot supply health services, and our doctor sits unemployed. That is great management of a country's assets. And then there's the news about President Geingob of Namibia that died on Saturday night. Apparently he was suffering from pancreatic cancer, but he kept it quiet. Now, I'm just curious what is going to happen in Namibia now, because he had a fairly good control and grip on that country, and he was firm with the activists that try to stir up a racial tension in that country. I don't know what's going to happen there now. And then there's this article, 7 arrested with rail infrastructure worth 175,000 rand. The suspects included 6 foreign nationals and a South African citizen. Now, this is absolutely a disgrace for the country. That's how our infrastructure is being destroyed. Infrastructure that taxpayers paid for and was built to grow the country's economy. Under this ANC, these things are all being plundered to nothing. And then there's this one, alleged bribery scam playing out at Palm Ridge Court. According to the source, the police, in consultation with lawyers, target people after a case is open against them. Now, I have said that the big plan is to crash the South African Republic the same way the USSR was pulled down. And for the for those who are interested, in the USSR, the collapse of the USSR started with the state losing its ability to provide to the people and state assets. It was a communist regime there, so everything basically belonged to the state. And the state assets, which included infrastructure and natural resources, landed in the hands of a selected and elected and Western managed oligarch grouping. So they got a hold of all the state assets, which made it impossible for the state to function any longer. Because in that communistic regime, the state had to provide all the income for the citizens basically. So now all those assets were moved into the hands of oligarchs, and these oligarchs, they organized crime syndicates to keep control over the citizens and the population. That is what happened there. And then the state collapsed. And it was in that chaos that Putin came in. And his first battle was to get rid of the criminal gangs. And he did it very effectively. Now the same thing is happening here in South Africa. That is my opinion. You can see how the state assets have already basically all been moved into the hands of the oligarchs. The XXX supported oligarchs. But the civil service is now so corrupt that nothing is basically functioning anymore for a normal citizen. And then you get news items like this, bribery at that court. That is what is happening in the country. These criminal gangs already have a lot of control over the country. The last really important and visible state asset that needs to get into the hands of the oligarchy is the Eskom national grid. Remember that. And then we have this, there's now a heated argument on the social media that I follow about that referendum party in the Cape. People has asked me, will I support that party? And I just said no, because to support that party is as good as you supporting the DA. There's no difference between those two parties. This is only DA members that wants a referendum for Cape independence. It is my opinion that the ULA is the right way to go. And there's a lot of talk about the shit-shot pact, as I call it. And there are commentators that are of the opinion that thing is not going to work. And I have said it last night in Skidmarks I did. For me, the small parties that are joining that pact now is actually signing their own death warrants, because they will not survive that pact. The DA is going to swallow them. And then we have that situation of the South African government that took Israel to the ICJ, and there is now a lot of indication that Iran actually financed that mission. And someone asked me about it last night in a discussion we had, and I said to him, look, I think what happened here is that the ANC strapped on a suicide vest and went to the ICJ. Now the problem for the ANC is that the way those suicide vests work is that once it's been strapped onto you, you can't get it off. And they are now walking around with that suicide vest, and someone is going to pull the linear at any moment. So in reality, the ANC, on behalf of South Africa, committed suicide with that case that they took to the ICJ. They are struggling now to justify it on moral grounds, but they cannot, because the things that they accuse Israel of, they are doing the same things here in South Africa, or similar things here in South Africa. And the world is waking up to that fact. And now we have a situation that a group in Israel is now going after a group of South African banks that are aiding the government in funding Hamas. Now that is going to turn out ugly for them. What I actually like about that is the fact that the banks that the Israelis are targeting now are the same banks that the Hornets group is targeting. And the Hornets made a lot of accusations about the sinister activities of our banks. But now with the Zionists entering that same fight, I'm beginning to swing towards the idea that the Hornets is onto something. But let's see what's going to happen. But I don't think this ANC government really thought it through well. And they are now sitting in a situation that they have to deal with the fallout from Israel. We saw the first action was there was a lot of money, I think 1.4 trillion rand, that moved out of the country just prior to the case being heard, investment that moved out. And then there was the article of the Israelis cancelling their orders for table grapes. The problem with that is that the farmers are sitting with those grapes on the vines. They must come off. What can they do? And then Pandor made a statement that the ANC is not concerned about the orders that are lost. They will find other markets. My question is, why do they now want to find other markets after the crash of the Israeli market? Why didn't they do this over the past 30 years to get South Africa more independent? But that's not on their minds, to run a country. They only after the money and the power. And then there's an article about the farmers' protests in Europe, and the guy tries to bring it into relation with the South African situation. Now, as I have mentioned it in a debate that I was in, what the people just tend to forget is the numbers involved. There are literally thousands upon thousands of farmers in those European countries. South Africa just don't have those numbers, and another problem is the small numbers we have is spread from the Limpopo down to the Cape. So I look at these things and I see what those farmers they are doing, but it is physically impossible for it to be done in South Africa. And then we have that nasty video that appeared on Facebook from Louis Liebenberg, over an hour, in which he made a lot of allegations against the Bittereinders and TV vessels. The thing is this, I have seen videos of Louis Liebenberg where he called his grandmother a whore last night I asked a Zulu guy. Now this is a guy that has got university degrees and he is in a senior position, and he himself says that he is not a traditional tribalist. He's more of a cosmopolitan tribalist. And he said to me, I asked him, and I said, what does the Zulu man think when he hears another man calls his own mother a whore? And the guy was absolutely stunned. And then he came with a reply that made me think a lot. And he said that in Zulu culture, you are taught to respect your parents, doesn't matter what. Because if you don't respect your parents, it will not go well with you. And I said to him, you know, that is what the Buddha also believed. And that is what is in the Bible. And he said to me, well, all he knows is that is how he was brought up, and in the society that he grew up, you were taught to respect your parents. Now I'm just wondering, Briekmerke makes a lot of statements and he creates the impression that he is extremely well connected into the Zulu monarchy and into the Zuma camp. And I'm wondering if that is real, because with a statement like, my mother was a whore, I don't think he's going to get traction in the Zulu culture. But I may be totally wrong. I don't know. I have asked around some of my sources, and I could not get any confirmation that he really is so well connected. But he acts it. And then there's a video that is running around again where the guys are saying CBDC is the end of money. And I have spoken about this previously. The reality is that in South Africa, CBDCs will never work because a large part of our population, those guys go to that bank ATM and they put that card in there and there's not rands coming out. They're going to burn the bank down. And this is what happened in Nigeria. That's why the Nigerian government boldly advertised that they're going now cashless with the CBDCs. And within 3 months, they cancelled that because a lot of banks were burned down and a lot of bank officials were killed. So I'm not really so concerned about the CBDCs. Look, digital currency will be the future, but this programmable currency controlled by the central bank and the government, that is where the problem is. And I think that control is going to be shattered, specifically in Africa. Africa is not going to fall for this shit. And then we go international, and there is articles about wildfires in Chile. 51 dead, more expected, says the president. Chile has declared a state of emergency as the wildfires ravaging the country continue to cause havoc, forcing the military to deploy more troops to the worst affected areas, with 43,000 hectares currently burning in 92 fires at the moment. Now, I want to refer back to the fires in the Cape. And now you must understand, I have spoken about this in the Skidmarks previously, when there was fires were ravaging the Free State and the Bushveld. The reality is, if you look at the fire situation in the Cape, in the Western Cape specifically, you must take a good look at the density of that vegetation, and it's mostly fynbos. Now you must understand, over the ages, that Cape fynbos area has been shaped by fire, because thunderstorms lit those areas every year, and they burn down and then they grow back for the next season. That is how that plant system works. But with all the nature conservation and fire control, there are blocks of these natural vegetation where there hasn't been a fire for a long time. And you must take a look at how much fuel has gathered over those years of no fires. And that is when the fires, when the fires come, they get out of hand like that. If you look at the videos that I've seen where the fires were in some of that plantations, look at the condition in those plantations. The floors are not clean. They're overgrown with shrub and weed and things like that, and fallen branches and fallen leaves and things. So there's a hell of a lot of fuel on the forest floor. That's why when the fires come, nobody can stop it. If a plantation is well maintained and the floor is kept clean, like I remember it being done by the Department of Forestry here in the Lowveld and so, and the timber growers, those plantations were kept clean. So when a fire comes, the fire runs through the plantation on the floor without igniting the trees. But if you look at the fires in the Cape, there's some of those areas that shrubbery is so huge and so dense, and you can see it is full of fuel. So maybe people should pay attention to nature and allow these places to burn once in a season. And then we have this one. Houthis vow continued attacks after the US-UK strikes them. After the US and the UK claimed a further 36 targets across 13 locations in Yemen overnight, Saturday, Houthi forces insisted they remained undeterred in their campaign in support of the Palestinian people. Houthi military spokesperson disputed the figures stated by Western allies, however, instead reporting 48 targets were hit, including in Yemen's capital Sana'a. Now, I don't know what the West aims to gain here, but the reality is that all ships can pass through there without a problem, except ships going to Israel. Europe worried about NATO future if Trump is re-elected. European allies are reportedly scared about NATO's strength if Donald Trump is re-elected, and follows through on previous threats to withdraw the US from the alliance, the New York Times reports. German officials and many of their NATO colleagues are informally discussing whether the almost 75-year-old structure of the alliance will be able to survive without the United States at its center. Having cake and eating it comes to mind, is the commentator. Well, the reality is that NATO has been basically disarmed by the Ukrainian war, and the EU specifically has been bankrupt by that war. I don't know how they think they can continue on the route that they are on. And then there's now rumors going around that Tucker Carlson is going to do an interview with Putin. That will be something that you should not miss. This is a little bit of trivia. Russian cosmonaut sets new record for time spent in space. The Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko has now spent more time away from Earth than anyone in history. Currently on his 5th mission aboard the ISS. By the time it's complete, he will have clocked a whopping 1,110 days in space. That's quite an achievement. And then I've got this little video here of another strike by the Ukrainians into a Lugansk town, just shooting civilians. That's what those Ukrainians are doing. And then there's this article, and it says, British Army could only last 2 months of war. The House of Commons Committee heard that the hollowing out of the British Army resources over the 15 years has left the armed forces so severely depleted it could only last 2 months of a full-scale war before running out of personnel, supplies and resources. And then they have a recruitment crisis. It's seen force numbers drop to a worrying low, compounded by the unrelenting pressure on those who actually sign up. Well, I have heard a lot of commentators talk about this, and I don't know where they get this 2 months. The last debate I saw on it, the guy said that, first of all, the British Armed Forces basically have almost no functioning tanks. Plus, they will be out of ammunition in 4 days. if they should engage like a country like Russia. So I don't know if that 2 months is true. Zelensky confirms he's considering firing Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny. When asked about the recent disagreements, this concerns the people who led Ukraine. A reset and a new beginning are required, not only in the military sphere. It is true I'm thinking about a replacement for Zaluzhny. Well, from other sources I have, the news is that Zaluzhny, some say Zaluzhny said, fine, I'm going. Others say Zaluzhny is saying he's not going. Others say Zaluzhny has not been formally informed that he must go. But there are sources that I see where there's now strong rumors of the possibility of a palace revolt in Kiev. Something must happen there, because there are hundreds of people dying unnecessarily. And I listened to a debate last night. The Russian forces are moving ahead at a steady pace every day. The Russians don't find much resistance, and large numbers of Ukrainian soldiers are just surrendering. I saw a video of one group that was cornered in a foxhole, and they came out, and then they said that it has been 5 days since they last had food, and they ran out of ammunition 7 days ago. So I don't know, that fiasco should stop. And the last one I'm going to talk about is that border crisis in Texas. And there's this article where this guy says, why are we guarding Ukraine's borders more than ours? Trump supporters at a rally in Texas amidst the border standoff. Dozens of former President Donald Trump supporters organized a rally against illegal immigration in Eagle Pass on Saturday. There is no country in the world that has no secure borders except the United States right now. Why is that? One of the protesters asked. It makes no sense. We've spent billions and billions of dollars to secure Ukraine, and it is a losing battle. I said it in a previous Skidmark that we must keep an eye on what's happening in Texas. Texas could be the first domino to fall, to make all these conglomerates fall apart. If Texas goes out of the United States, they secede, there's a lot of other countries that's going to follow the same route, especially in Europe. Now, that is for the day. I hope you find it amusing and interesting and informative. It's not a formal news bullet. I'm just giving you an overview of the headlines that I read. And these are the things that I think you should take note of. Please give me a like and subscribe and share the thing. Thank you for your support.